Welcome to the Dirobi Health Show. Today I've got Chris Mirabile of NOVOS Labs. Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this interview. One of the things that is interesting in your bio is you've gone through something that very few people on this planet have, and that is cancer in your early teens. And why don't we start with a little bit of your backstory and where this all started for you, this discovery of the critical nature of health and looking after your body.
Sure. So I started getting interested in health when I was 12 years old. I picked up an issue of Men's Health magazine, and I was inspired by the people in that magazine, and said, I want to be in good shape.
Early adopter. Wow. 12 with Men's Health.
I wanted to differentiate myself from the other guys in class to attract some of the girls I was attracted to. So it was admittedly a superficial aesthetic-based interest in health when I was 12. But that rapidly evolved when I was 16 years old. I was in New York City on a school trip, and I suddenly felt dizzy and nauseous, and I ended up having a seizure, which turned out was caused by a brain tumor over my left temporal lobe, so right above my ear over here. And they had to do emergency surgery within a few days. It was larger than a golf ball, and fortunately, I'm here to tell the tale. So everything more or less worked out okay, though I like to joke that half of my brain is missing. If I forget something, that's the reason why.
That's a great built-in excuse for a lot of things, right?
Exactly.
I'm sorry I did that, honey. It's the tumor.
Exactly. It's the gap in my brain. But fortunately, yes, everything for the most part has ended up okay. But that is also when my interest in health evolved into one that was more biological driven rather than superficially driven. And so the question is, what actually makes us healthy, and what causes disease, and why did I get a brain tumor? What is it different about me versus my classmates? I was thinking I'm more healthy, I'm eating healthy, I'm exercising more. Why did I get a brain tumor and others didn't? And the doctors told me, oh, you have the same odds of a brain tumor as anyone else out there, so the chance of recurrence is the same. But I couldn't accept that. So I dug into my genes and I analyzed them, and there's a few SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, essentially differences in my genes compared to others, that increase the likelihood of a brain tumor, not by an enormous amount, maybe by an extra 20%. But that was like part of it was consoling to hear that. Like, okay, at least there's some sort of rationale. There's some explanation for maybe what contributed to this in the first place.
Interesting.
And then that got me much more interested in digging deeper into health and avoidance of disease and understanding my genes and my biology and so on.
Fantastic. And did that lead to shaping what you chose to do in your education and that type of thing?
It did. So after the tumor was removed, first of all, it changed me tremendously. I went from playing high school football to writing poems on the weekends by myself in the woods. Right, it was just like a completely different person. But one that I'm thankful for, or the experiences I'm thankful for, because it led to me really thinking about existential questions from a very early age, and what do I want to make of my life. And that's part of what fueled me to become an entrepreneur. I wanted to be able to chart my own path and also have an impact on people, an outsized impact compared to what I thought I would have if I went through the traditional path. And then it also planted a seed for what has evolved into essentially the company that I have since founded and am currently leading up, called NOVOS, which is focused on the biology of longevity and aging, and to be able to slow down the process of aging. Because most people don't realize this, though when you hear it, it makes perfect sense. Aging is the number one factor that contributes to chronic illness, most chronic illnesses, everything from most forms of cancer to cardiovascular disease, macular degeneration, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, sarcopenia, which is muscle loss, you name it. Aging is the primary factor behind all of those.
Okay, and we had your partner in crime on a while back, Chris, and he went through the 10 factors that you guys have identified. I won't ask you to go through all 10 today, because I'd refer people back to that episode. It was fantastic. And Chris really went into the weeds with me in 30 or 40 minutes or more on this. And so for everyone listening, to learn more about NOVOS Labs and go into greater detail, do that. But Chris, what I really want to talk to Chris about is more of from a personal angle, because I've seen your labs and the testing. I can't remember if you sent that to me or Publicist or somebody sent that over to me as we were preparing this podcast. And you have really made this work. You have created this really nice gap between your chronological age and your biological age. Now, a lot of people listening will know what that means, but just very briefly, just explain what that project is about and what you're trying to achieve there.
Sure. So I recently, as of 3 weeks ago, launched a blog, a personal blog. It's called slowmyage.com. And on that blog, you can actually see everything that we'll be talking about on this episode. I will, in the future, release some articles related to my lifestyle, like my diet or supplements or my daily routines and so on. The intention behind that website is to, first of all, make more and more people aware of the idea of aging and the biological age versus chronological age, and to empower people with the information that they need to be able to take control of this on their own. Whether they buy supplements or not doesn't matter to me. My mission is to add as many years to people's lives as possible, right? I want to add billions of years to people, to the world's lifespan, if you will.
Nice.
And not everyone is going to do that through supplements. There's so many other things you can do. So that website is really my first step in that direction on a personal level beyond NOVOS Labs.
Cool. Yeah. And so obviously the point is if the clock says that you're 50, for those of you listening, but you do testing to, with machines that couldn't care less who you are, but they just go through your blood work or whatever test you have done. And they come out and say, you have the health of a 35-year-old or a 30-year-old. That's what we would call your biological age. And Chris, you're really cheating it. What is your current discrepancy between your chronology and biology?
Right. Yeah. So I'll just add a bit to that. So chronological age is just how many times the Earth has gone around the sun, right? Like how many days you've been alive for, basically based on your birthday. Yeah. Whereas a biological age is how old your body is biologically speaking. And there's a number of different ways to be able to measure this. There's epigenetic clocks, which looks at your epigenome. Essentially, your epigenome is which genes are turned on and off. So we all have our genes. That's kind of like the piano that we're born with. But then your epigenome is the piano player that is playing a different tune for everyone, right? And so there are patterns to this epigenome that are correlated with age. So if you take two 40-year-olds, their epigenetic switches are going to be more or less aligned with each other. And you can use big data to be able to make these associations and figure out how old you are. Getting future generations or later generations of epigenetic clocks have gone on to correlate the epigenome with mortality risk. So what is the chance that you're going to pass away at a given age? And everyone's aware of this through like insurance, right? Life insurance.
Yeah. Actuarial tables.
Tables that are looking at the likelihood, right? So there's this, conceptually speaking, there's a link with that you can look at a biological level rather than chronological. So for me, I've had a number of these tests done, starting with epigenetic tests. There are, if I were to average out all of the tests, it comes out, the age, biological age that comes back is 25.6. Now I'm chronologically 38. The laboratory that ran the test has said that this is these are the most impressive results that they've ever seen. I say that humbly, like I'm very fortunate and feel blessed to be able to say this in the first place. But there are multiple different tests. If you care to, we can talk about some specific ones. But going beyond just the epigenetic test, the traditional biological age test, there's one specifically I would bring up, which is actually your pace of aging. So there's a clock that is called the Dunedin Pace Clock. It's a collaboration between scientists at Columbia University and Duke University, where they have looked at people for over the span of 45 years now, every single year, looking at how their epigenome evolves, looking at their health conditions like Are there any things happening to these people? Are they getting diseases? Are they healthy? What's their lifestyle, and so on? And then using all of this data, putting together this clock, and it tells you the pace at which you're aging at that current point in time. And according to that clock, I'm aging 31% slower per year. So in other words, every 1 calendar year, I'm aging 0.69 biological years. So hopefully I can keep that up if I continue a healthy lifestyle. Ideally, I will. But if I were to completely change my lifestyle and start eating burgers and fries every day and being sedentary, then that number would actually increase in terms of my pace of aging, and might actually exceed 1 year per year.
Okay. So let's start. So that's super exciting. And I'm sure everyone listening is interested to learn how you've done this. So let's start with the basics, and that is what you eat. Tell me some of the basic components to your dietary principles.
Sure. So there was a period in which I experimented, like this was about a decade ago now, with a paleo diet, and then I progressed on to a ketogenic diet, and neither one of them really worked particularly well for me. In particular, the ketogenic diet, as much as I was excited by the research behind it and the science, I found that after enough time would elapse, I would lose energy. My libido would disappear. I didn't feel myself anymore. So what do I do now? Now my diet is more based on the traditional Mediterranean diets, which have been found to lead to centenarians. Like, even if you look at different corners of the world, there's a lot of commonalities across these blue zones, if you will, of centenarians, the longest living people beyond 100 years. And what's common in them is they're high in vegetables. There's a lot of herbs and spices, which herbs and spices tend to have a lot of really healthy compounds within them, as you find from rosemary, rosavins, and rosemary, or gingerols and ginger, and so on. In terms of protein, primarily getting that through seafood, ideally fatty seafood like salmon or sardines. Minimizing my carbs, now not to the degree of a ketogenic diet, but getting rid of as much of the sugar as possible. And then if I am having carbs, ideally they're more complex starches, like maybe it's coming through tubers, sweet potato, for example. I will occasionally have, indulge in like a pizza or something. And part of the rationale for that is my girlfriend is from Italy, and her father is telling me all about the Sardinian blue zone people and the diets that they eat. And he's telling me about like how they still do consume some carbs in the form of pizza and crackers and so on. And so like that's in my head, the justification to be able to do so. What else beyond that? Mushrooms. I get a lot of legumes, sprouted beans, essentially. I integrate that into my diet as well.
Dairy?
Fair amount of dairy, I minimize. So in terms of actual milk, none. I have zero milk for a number of reasons. First of all, lactose intolerance, though you can take enzymes to help with that. There's also ingredients within dairy that can potentially accelerate aging, whether it be hormonally through like IGF-1, or it can even be a component in it called galactose. Galactose is a component of dairy that is actually used in scientific studies to accelerate aging. It's that potent of an accelerant of aging that they isolate it and use it in mouse studies, for example. To speed up aging.
So Mediterranean, but without dairy, because the Mediterranean diet has some dairy, but
it does have dairy. I'll have occasional cheese. So cheese,
which is a fermented food, which we need some of too. So
it is fermented. And to the point of fermented foods, I also incorporate sauerkraut and kimchi into my diet as well for the microbiome, and then get a lot of prebiotics that can help to feed those, whether it be unmodified potato starch for that purpose, or FOS, which is fructooligosaccharides, and so on. There's a number of different things that I incorporate either supplementally or through diet that can feed that microbiome.
Okay, great. So great answer on nutrition generally. I'm sure there's more to it, but that was a great general answer. Now, fitness. And of course, as we know, some people fitness is an area where you can shorten your life as well. We tend to think of elite athletes as being super fit, and of course they can accomplish great things right now at the peak of their powers. But elite athletes and many professional athletes are actually shortening their life by overdoing in fitness. So fitness is an interesting one. We can't underdo, we can't overdo. What are your thoughts on fitness?
Yeah, so fitness is something that I've enjoyed doing since I mentioned before, since I was 12 years old, weightlifting, and then eventually I started running track, and to this day I still run and bicycle. You're completely right though. Like, you don't want to take things too far. I've intentionally never run a marathon, for example. I love the idea of the challenge, but in terms of the health effects of it, I think it's pushing yourself too
It
far.
sucks. I did one. I have my finisher's medal from marathon, and I'm never doing another one. So
No,
you're not,
not missing out.
not missing out.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. The furthest I've run is a little bit more than a half a marathon, just like on my own for training. So like I'll cap it at maybe like the 14-mile mark or so. But generally speaking, I'm running like the equivalent of maybe 10 Ks. And
that's a good distance.
Yeah. And I'm doing that maybe twice a week, approximately. I'm walking a ton. I'm weightlifting typically about 3 days per week.
Heavy, medium, hit workouts. What do you do when you're hitting the weights? What style of weightlifting are you doing?
Yeah, so I like to be as versatile as possible. For my 30th birthday, I set the goal to achieve the Guinness Book of World Records for the most pull-ups in 60 seconds. And although my video submission, it had a flaw in it and it ultimately wasn't accepted, I did exceed the record.
Wow.
My personal best was 54 pull-ups in 60 seconds. And so that's purely calisthenics. But I also liked to be able to lift for power as well. So immediately after that, I set a goal to triple my body weight on the deadlift. So I weighed 175 and I achieved 525 on the deadlift. Now, I'm not encouraging that for the sake of longevity. It's heavy on the joints and so on. But, I was 32 years old. It was like a one-time thing to achieve. What I'd say I do now is it's a blend of the calisthenics, a little bit of the bodybuilding side of weightlifting as well, just for the aesthetic side of things, and then a little bit of power as well. So depending on the cycle that I'm in, I might be doing one or the other, or even combining it in a single workout. Like I might do calisthenics and start my workout with many sets of pull-ups, but then go into a heavier lift on my back or biceps on that same day. I like to have that flexibility to be able to handle strength or body weight, or if I really need to build that power for some sort of lift, to be flexible with it all.
Yeah, I love it. I love the pull up. I always have ever since I started CrossFit years ago. I've got a Rogue bar out in my gym, and for me, a pull up and muscle up strength is kind of a core thing that I always want to maintain. And I do different sets of pull ups, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, sometimes very slow descending. You understand all that. I do it. I don't just do the same pull ups every single time. I had shoulder surgery 7 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And it's the thing I'm missing the most. I can't put weight on it yet. Like I'm doing the super lightweight physical therapy stuff still at the moment. And so you're killing me as you talk about your passion for the pull up and setting the world record. That's super cool. Are you going to try it again? Or is that like a while ago, back in your past, when you're not doing that kind of thing anymore?
I was 29 years old. I was always consistently doing sets of more than 30 pull-ups. And then I was curious, like, what is the world record? Like, is it even close? And when I saw that it was just, I think at the time it was like maybe 42 or 43. I can't recall off the top of my head.
Interesting.
I was like, that's actually achievable. And so that's when I decided, let me try it. And it's partially because I was coming upon my 30th birthday and I was feeling old. It's like, I'm leaving my 20s. Let me prove to myself that I can achieve something when I'm 30 that I did not achieve even in my teens and early 20s. And so will I strive for this again? I'm not sure. But the idea of like, I'm approaching 40 now, of doing something when I'm 40 that I was never able to do when I was younger. I like that idea of challenging myself and showing that I can actually achieve more now that I'm older than when I was younger.
Okay, fantastic. Let's move into supplements. You guys obviously have a supplement line, and I'm sure obviously you're using those. And I'm also a supplement seller. We have a different track that we're on. We're more basic in a sense, that we really want people to fill in deficiencies. Too many people are vitamin and mineral deficient. And so we start right there. And then we have a line of supplements in that regard, but they're not specifically longevity, although obviously having being missing key vitamins and minerals in your system is not helping with longevity. So obviously there's some element of longevity, but yours at NOVOS Labs, if I understand right, they're specifically designed for longevity. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So we like to so what you're doing is great as well. So we generally bucket them into two categories. One is general health supplements. That's what you described you're selling.
Yeah.
And then there's the longevity health supplements. General health supplements are absolutely necessary, to your point. If you're deficient in something, which practically everyone who's not supplementing is deficient in something, whether they know it or not. And it can take years to really show its ugly head, right? But whether it be selenium or magnesium or choline, right? Like, who thinks about getting enough choline? The government hardly even talks about choline.
Or chromium,
right?
zinc,
or chromium. Yeah.
All these things. And by the way, just before you go on, Chris, for people who are right now maybe nodding their heads like, oh, these are two supplement sellers selling me. No. Go get your freaking blood work done. You don't have to believe us. Everything Chris just said, just get a nutritional blood panel done. So him and I are confident in this because of science, not because we're trying to push our stuff on you. We're trying to sell you the stuff that will fill in those deficiencies. So Chris, I just thought we ought to pause right there and make sure people understand that this is very science-based. The claim that you made that most people are deficient in something if they're not supplementing is absolutely backed up by the hundreds of thousands of biohackers who've had their blood work done over the last 15 years. And every one of them is deficient in stuff.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, don't buy my supplement or your supplement, but go on Amazon and find something that works for you, right? Like, the point is that you're almost definitely deficient in something. And I'll give a quick example of choline, right? Choline is an ingredient you can get naturally. If you eat 3 to 4 eggs per day, the whole egg with the yolk, you'll get enough choline for the day. But it's difficult to achieve the necessary value of choline each day if you're not doing that. And why is choline important? It's considered the forgotten B vitamin. Choline is, first of all, the fundamental building block of acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter that helps you think. It helps you remember. It helps you store memories. It's important for your muscle functions, your nerve functions. So when you're moving your body, you're using acetylcholine for that. It's also very important for the phospholipids that line all of your cells. So it's basically like the layer around your cells that allow things in and out. And if you don't have enough choline, you're going to have deficiencies with that. So the wrong things can get in and out of those cells. And also very important, which most people don't realize, is that choline is what your liver uses to mobilize fatty acids from the liver and utilize the fatty acids. Now, something that is increasingly a health concern for people is fatty liver. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? And it's extremely common as you get into the later decades of life for people to have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and you don't need to be obese. There are studies where they give animals, like dogs, they discovered choline through dogs actually, like more than 100 years ago, because dogs that were getting diets that were very deficient in choline were developing liver disease. And then they found that through a series of events, they eventually found out that eggs had the choline in it, and that could then cure the dog of the fatty liver disease. Long story short, if you're deficient in choline, it could have psychiatric effects in terms of your motivation, your ability to focus, recall things, memory, and so on. It could lead to fatty liver disease over the long term. So many other things can go wrong. And most people aren't eating enough eggs and getting enough of the choline into their diet. There are other ways to do it, but that's just one single example. You could do the same thing about iron deficiency, about minerals like magnesium and zinc and so on. So yes, 100%.
I love that. And so what's your top supplement? What's your, let me rephrase, what's your desert island supplement? If a person on a super tight budget can buy one thing from your store, what do they buy?
Well, so it's not my store because I don't sell it. If you're on a desert island, assuming it's got plenty of sunshine, you don't need vitamin D. But if it were like trees everywhere, you get no sunshine, I would say vitamin D. Vitamin D is extremely important for your immune system. It's technically a hormone, not a vitamin. And there's so many different physiological functions that it can provide. Now, that's of course assuming you have adequate vitamin C from the plants you're eating, right? You're not getting scurvy or
Yeah, a
anything.
lot of assumptions in my very elementary question. But
Right,
what's
right.
your tell me about Novos Labs though. You have your supplements. Do you have a flagship product?
Yes, we do. So that's called Novos Core. Novos Core is composed of 12 ingredients that address what's known as the 10 mechanisms or hallmarks of aging that Dr. Verberg explained to you in another episode.
Yeah.
These ingredients are thoroughly researched. You can find out more about, first of all, the filters we put the ingredients through before we consider them for inclusion, as well as then the research. More than 190 scientific studies back up these ingredients and their inclusion. And then we've also run our own studies with third-party labs, in vitro studies, looking at things like DNA damage and cellular senescence, and multiple other studies that have not yet been published. You can find all of that on novoslabs.com/evidence. Just a couple of quick points about that. So one of the studies we ran was looking specifically at DNA damage, and the third-party laboratory that we commissioned, they're called iCore Life Sciences. They specialize in longevity research, typically for pharma and biotech. And they had told us before the study that they've done $7 million worth of studies on ingredients within our formula, as well as pharmaceutical drugs, you name it, to look at the DNA damage that can be prevented from these molecules. And they warned us that there was no really significant effect from any of these compounds that they've studied. But we said, okay, let's go ahead with the study anyway, because we believe that we're exploiting synergies in our formulation. So they ran the study, and they found that they called their CEO before us because they were so surprised by the result. And then they told us that we were able to reduce DNA damage by 77% at max, and on average by 68% reduction in DNA damage. This is unheard of. This is compared to a placebo, in which they irradiated that placebo without Novos, and then they irradiated, these are in human cells, they irradiated a bunch of human cells at different dosages with Novos. And then they also had a control, which was no irradiation, no Novos. So we can compare all of those different scenarios to each other. And the result was very, very significant.
Outstanding. And people listening, you learn about that at novoslabs.com, NOVOS labs.com. And Chris, you've covered some big topics for us so far today. Everything from diet, supplements, and exercise, which are three of the biggest arenas in health. Do you have a stress management program?
Good question. So
if not formal, informal. Talk to us about stress management, because we know that for longevity, stress management is
critical.
It's critical.
It's very important. Yes. So there was a period in my life where I did have a lot of stress. I had a failed startup venture, one that was really on its way to success, and suddenly imploded for a number of reasons. And I became depressed for about a year's time. And during that period, I spent a lot of time reflecting and meditating. And I really got into the habit of meditating. And doing so, I really started to understand my how thoughts that I wasn't even consciously aware of, but when I started observing, I would then become conscious of these thoughts, how that actually affected my physiology and my breathing and how I felt and attention and so on. And I still meditate to this day, which is very helpful. But even when I don't, having done that as much as I did, it makes me much more self-aware and in the moment and able to cope with things. And then also another stress management technique I employ is just looking at the bigger picture, like the difficult times I've been through in my life, whether it be like the health issue with a brain tumor or the failed venture or losing a dear loved one of mine and so on. And then saying ultimately, what does it matter, this situation? At the end of the day, does this really matter? Like, I'm mortal. It's a finite lifetime. like, why am I making such a big deal about this? It's really my ego that's making a big deal about this. And then it kind of disintegrates. Yeah.
Yeah. I think psychologists call that reframing, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking a situation that could be causing you distress and reframing it for perspective. I think that's super valuable. And I could totally relate to what you're saying about becoming aware. You don't know what you don't know. I'm similar. I have a meditation habit now of about 6 years, and along the way, I became aware that I was more fidgety and anxious in mornings where I started my day with social media. And that may seem obvious to some people, but I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't paying attention to it until I paid attention to it. And when I started limiting myself to social media after breakfast and never after dinner, so just during the day, right? So when I do any social media, news, if I want to learn about events in the world, I do it then. Never before, never after. And that one simple habit, it was amazing to me how much emotionally different I was when I just changed that time frame. So I didn't like go cold turkey off social media like a lot of people recommend. I don't spend a lot of time on it anymore. But it was interesting because it's like you don't know, you're not really aware that you might be a little high strung because it just feels normal until it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So that reminds me of an insight that I once had, which is when you're sleeping, your brain gets into a different mental state, and in which small problems can be magnified, right? Like that's why we have nightmares, and that's why like that little thing that happened during the day where you had an encounter with someone turns into this nightmare of a dream, right? Like everything is magnified in terms of its significance, partially as a survival mechanism for us to focus on the things that are potentially most important for our survival, right?
All right.
And so when we wake up, we're still partially in that mindset. And so I've observed in myself that there might be an email I receive or social media, to your point, or a text message that when perceived first thing in the morning, rolling out of bed, seems much more significant and induces more stress than, to your point, if it's read like after breakfast or after lunch or at nighttime when you have more serotonin and you're more calm. Think about it. When you wake up, your cortisol levels are skyrocketing because that's what helps to wake you up in the first place. When you're going to sleep, your serotonin levels are high because you're calming down, easing into sleep, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, like depending on the time of day, that same piece of information can have a very, very different impact on your perception of it.
I love that insight. And like you said, that kind of layered on top of mine, your insight into it is different than mine, but we're kind of arriving at the same place, but understanding it more richly. I feel like that's really a cool insight, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it has been a lot of fun. We've covered a lot of ground in about half an hour here, and I really appreciate it. And for those of you listening, I hope you have also picked up some really great ideas and some motivation to do what Chris has done, which is to reverse that biological clock that's ticking as much as is reasonable and possible. Chris, sounds like you've really mastered it and have some great ideas for others. So thanks so much for sharing them on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Do you have any final thought or thing you want to share before I let you go?
Yeah. So anyone who's interested, as I mentioned before, slowmyage.com. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter as slowmyage. And then if you're interested in learning more about the science of aging, you can go to the blog on novoslabs.com, or follow us on, again, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, Novos Labs, for all of those social channels.
Fantastic. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you.
For those of you listening, this is Dave